All right, what is up, folks? Welcome back to another episode of the Help Me Understand podcast. I am your host, Coach J.K. McLeod, and we are kicking off a Tuesday episode. So if you are new around these parts, on a Tuesday episode, I'm primarily focusing on something that is fitness, nutrition, overall health, somewhat related. And today's episode is no different. Today, I'm going to talk about warming up. Is it overhyped or underused? And give you some, hopefully, different perspectives that you can then move forward and make that decision either for yourself, or maybe you are collaborating with a coach like myself, and maybe this clears up a little bit for you. So before getting into today's episode any further, I, as always, want to say thank you for choosing to press play on the Help Me Understand podcast. I know that you have a lot of different podcast content that you can and likely do consume. So I truly never take it for granted and want to make sure that I always take a moment to say that I appreciate you taking the time to include the Help Me Understand podcast in your weekly listening rotation. All right, so let's go ahead and get into today's episode. So we're going to talk about warming up today. So it's something that some people absolutely swear by. We've got some folks that say it's not really necessary. And while I'm not necessarily here to completely say you're right or you're wrong, I am going to insert my opinion into this entire argument. I file this particular topic, like warming up, I file it under this imaginary list that I have yet to create that is things that seem to be controversial, but really at the end of the day shouldn't be. So let me give you a scenario that may be familiar to you because it's very familiar to the population that I work with. Someone comes into the gym, they're really short on time, and so the first decision that they make is, I'm just going to go ahead and skip doing my warm-up. So are they right or are they wrong? And is that something that you do? Why do you do that? Why don't you do that? Do you swear by it or not? So I want you to just take a moment and think, okay, if I'm in that scenario, what am I going to do? And then hopefully by the end of this episode, you will feel somewhat better informed on what the right move is for you. Okay, so first, before getting into a study that I actually found, a recent study, I think this was from April or May of 2025 that this particular study was released, I first want to clarify the terms between a general warm-up and a specific warm-up, which for the purposes of this particular episode, a specific warm-up, I'm also going to interchangeably be using terms like build-up sets, ramp-up sets, feeler sets, and I'll go into that in just a little bit. Because also in this study, what they were really focusing on was whether or not a specific warm-up prior to going into your, what we're going to call working sets, so your heaviest sets of your lifts, made any sort of a difference. So before getting into that science, let's go a little bit deeper into clarifying the difference between a general warm-up and a specific warm-up. So with a general warm-up, we are essentially referring to things like some light cardio, some mobility work, some dynamic movement, purposely raising your core and muscle temperature, possibly just kind of getting those joints nice and warm and lubed up, ready to roll. It basically, a general warm-up will prepare your system in a very broad nature. So a general warm-up would look something like, if you've done any of my training programs and I have in there either a warm-up or a primer, then it would consist of something like, let me give you an example. Something like doing inchworms, which is where you're standing and you will bend down, almost like a bend down, touch your toes, and then you'll walk with your hands out to a plank position. And then you'll basically reverse that process. And from that plank position, you'll walk those hands back towards your toes and then stand all the way up. So you'll be doing some hinging and walking out, activating some core movements. Also, some things that can be in a general warm-up would be like side-to-side leg swings, where you're standing in an upright position and then you're swinging your right leg from the left side to the right side. The description that I use in classes when I'm coaching this is you're swinging your leg like a pendulum, or you're swinging from 9 p.m. to 3 p.m. on one leg, and then you do the same thing on the other leg, getting those hips nice and warm, excuse me. And let's say you could even do things like doing some air squats. So just body weight squats. You can do some push-ups. You can do all sorts of different things, but you're basically doing things that will move your body in either just generally, just different directions, or maybe you're doing specific movements. So not to be confused with a specific warm-up, but in a general warm-up, you may also be doing specific movements that are priming your body for the main movement patterns that you're going to do for that workout, or that you may be getting ready for your main lift. Like let's say that it's a day where your first big movement of the day is going to be a leg press or a back squat. So you may be doing air squats, you may be doing some lunges, you may be doing some hip abduction work, things that really start to mobilize the areas that you are soon going to be loading. Also included in a general warm-up, as I mentioned earlier, light cardio. So this could be something like a light jog. It can be an incline walk. Doesn't even necessarily need to be an incline walk. It can just be a moderately paced walk. That's something that I've been doing pretty regularly lately. So that is a general warm-up. Now, when we talk about a specific warm-up, and as I mentioned earlier, with a specific warm-up, those are typically going to be starting lighter, but progressively then getting heavier versions of the upcoming lift that you're going to do. So I will also include underneath that heading of a specific warm-up, and if you've done my programs before, you've likely heard any combination of these terms where I talk about ramp-up sets or feeler sets or build-up sets. And the whole idea of these particular sets is that you are gradually loading more weight on the bar, or you're gradually, if you're using a selectorized machine like a leg press, something that's not plate loaded, but it's something where they're utilizing like cable resistance and the cable stacks where you move a pin, further and further down in order to add more weight. You will be doing starting lighter and then progressively loading that heavier to get closer to where you feel like you're really going to be doing like your hardest work. I'll call those ramp up, feeler, or build up sets. That's where the specific warm-up terminology really comes into play. So again, a general warm-up is going to be overall mobility, some dynamic movement, some light cardio. You're essentially prepping your overall system, your body, to get ready for going into, for the purposes of what I'm talking about here, resistance training. If we say specific warm-up, we're doing the actual movement that we're going to be loading. We just may be starting lighter and then progressively adding more weight. Again, it's either more weight on the bar, moving that pin further down in the machine so that you can add additional weight, picking up progressively heavier dumbbells as you build things up. So the whole idea is that you're gradually increasing the load so that your working sets really feel on point. The specific warm-up will also just prime your overall movement patterns, your nervous system, and your force output. So the reason that I wanted to spend a few minutes starting with that is because I believe that distinction can be really important, because I think that debates about the should you warm up or not warm up often collapse those two things. So I'm going to call the general warm-up your primer, and I'm going to call the specific warm-up your build-up sets or your feeler sets. They collapse those two things into one, and that starts to cause even more confusion. So it's very similar to when somebody may talk about this particular type of exercise helps burn more fat. And if you've, I think that I did a previous episode where I tried to make sure that I ask you to pose this question. If someone makes a statement like this exercise burns more fat, ask them to clarify, are you talking about body fat or dietary fat when you say this burns more fat? So same thing, if you're in a discussion and somebody says, don't worry, you're short on time, don't worry about it, just skip the warm-up. Are they talking about the general warm-up, what I would call the primer, just getting your body and your mind in the position to do the work? Or are they talking about the specific warm-up, which would be the build-up sets, lighter weight progressively getting heavier before going into your actual working sets? And I will say, before moving into getting into this study, I will say that the concept of doing specific warm up sets, doing build up sets, doing feeler sets is probably one of, if not the most, actually I hesitate. I would say doing build up sets and doing specific warm up sets, and also then the understanding of RIR and RPE. Those two things are like 1 and 1A, or neck and neck, with some of the biggest breakthroughs that clients have when I first start working with them and really getting an understanding of following a structured training program. And for reference, the majority of the people that I tend to work with for a long period of time are folks who have had some experience with lifting weights before. They're not completely new to lifting weights. They really, overall, more often than not, they just feel like they should have better results, whether that's aesthetic, strength, or just overall how they feel and energy level. They feel like things should be better considering how much energy and time and money that they've invested into lifting weights. So when we get a better understanding of being able to work in build-up sets, like how that actually works, or feeler sets, understanding how that works, and also getting an understanding of RIR, which is reps in reserve, and RPE, which is rate of perceived exertion. Those two things really, I can't really decide which one is the bigger breakthrough, but when someone really starts to understand those concepts, man, things just really take off from there. So, all right. Let me talk to you a bit about this study, and I will do my best to link this study in the show notes for anybody who wants to really deep dive and go into it. It was a study that was done in April or May of 2025. So in this particular study, they took 29 trained individuals. So for the purposes of this study, trained meant that they averaged about 4 years of resistance training experience. As far as gender and age, I tried to find any information I could, and there just was nothing there about breaking it out between understanding how many were males or females. So I could only just make a completely baseless assumption that was likely like a mixed gender group, but it was not specified, and there was no mean age that was explicitly given in the document that I could find at all. It was specifically just trained individuals. So 29 trained individuals, and they split them into 3 groups. So group number 1 did no warm-up sets at all. And we're talking specific warm-ups. So to go back to what we just talked about. So in this particular study, they compared this is all focused on getting an understanding of if you do specific warm-up sets. So this would be, again, lighter to moderate to heavy versions of the exact lift that you're going to do prior to going into like your hardest working sets, would there be any sort of a difference in overall results? So they're not looking at general warm-up at all. They are looking at specific warm-up. So back to that. All right, so they have group number 1 did no warm-up sets whatsoever. Group number 2 did 1 specific warm-up set that was about 75% of their 10 rep max for the movements. And then group number 3 did 2 specific warm-up sets that were about, first one was 55% of their 10 rep max. Then the next one was 75% of their 10 rep max. So again, to review, group 1, no warm-up sets. Group number 2, 1 warm-up set. Group number 3 did 2 warm-up sets before going into their 10 rep max. So the working sets for all 3 groups, no matter how much they did or didn't warm up, was to do 4 sets at their 10 rep max to failure. And that they measured 2 specific movements. It was the bench press. They did use a Smith machine for that. So they measured bench press, and they mentioned 45-degree leg press, which is about the average angle that you would have, about the average back angle that you would have for a leg press. So those 2 movements, they did 4 sets for your 10 rep max to failure. So the way that they measured this was number of reps, the volume load, what they call the fatigue index, and then the rate of perceived exertion, so RPE. So basically on a scale of 1 to 10, how hard did you feel like that was? So how hard did you exert yourself? 10, I thought I was going to die, and I'm pretty sure I saw Jesus twice. 1 being, are we even working out today, bro? All right. And then just overall subjective readiness. So those are the things that they measured. What was interesting is in this particular study, there was pretty much little difference found between the actual conditions. So between the group that did 1 warm-up set or 2 warm-up sets or no warm-up sets at all, overall performance, which again was measured by the total number of reps that they did and the total volume that they were able to lift, was, and this was a direct quote from the study, it was negligible to small in favor of warm-ups, but not meaningfully better. So overall, there was not a much of a difference between the 3 groups in overall performance. So the hypothesis that performance would increase from the group that did no warm-ups to if you did 2 warm-up set or 1 warm-up set to the group that did 2 warm-up sets, it was actually not supported by the evidence in this particular study. So subjective readiness and then RPE, which those particular things, there's not a specific measurement for that. That's based just on the individual's feedback. So it would be very similar to just asking after you did a set, okay, how did that feel? That's something that I'll do with my in-person training clients after finishing a set, where I say, all right, we're going to lift this. I think we're going to be somewhere in the 10 to 15 rep range. The main thing is I want you to go until you feel like you could do maybe 3 to 4 more if you just had to, for example, in a set. So they'll lift to that particular point, and then I'll ask, okay, how did you feel about that? Like how many more reps did you feel like you could have done? And then on a scale of 1 to 10, again, 10, I think I just saw God. 1 being like, I could have kept going for days, like no problem. Where did you feel like that shook out? That's how they measured the subjective readiness and RPE. And again, that was similar across all 3 of the groups. Now, something that I will point out, just a few things that I believe will provide a little bit more context around some of what my perceived limitations are with this particular study. 1, they specifically focused on 2 exercises here. So if you remember correctly, we had the leg press, the 45-degree leg press was the first exercise, or one of the exercises, and then the Smith machine bench press. So those are the 2 exercises, and they had them in fairly, what I'm going to call like moderate load rep ranges, because we're talking about a 10 rep max as opposed to something where we are looking to go to a 1 rep max or a 2 rep max, something like that. Also, for those of you who may be more along the Olympic lifting track, where you're doing things like a clean and jerk or a snatch, things along those lines, it didn't cover that. So jury would still be out as to whether or not this appropriately goes to covering very highly technical, or even in this case, like really explosive lifts, again, like clean and jerk, snatch, power clean, different movements like that. I also thought about deadlifts. I mean, deadlifts I think are a very technical lift also too, just because you have multiple joints moving at the same time. Also, something to keep in mind is that the warm-up loads were pretty moderate. They weren't super high intensity, because remember, again, even though the group that did the 2 specific warm-up sets was at 55% and 75%, they were at 55 and 75% of a 10 rep max, not 55% and 75% to their 1 rep max. So that's something to keep in mind. All right. And then also with this particular study, it was acute performance only. So just what happened then in the moment. No data was given that I could see on any sort of long-term effects. So injury rates and the effect on movement quality over time. How could it be applicable to me? All right, so where I think this information applies and where I believe it really doesn't. So I would say that you could for sure use this study as evidence that if your goal is hypertrophy with moderate loads, and you're already warmed up somewhat, then a specific warm up beyond like your minimal sets may not necessarily make a whole lot of difference for you. So a couple of specific warm up sets before going into your working sets potentially may help you and it potentially may not. Now, I'm going to give you my opinion on this very shortly. So based on this study, if you are someone who is going to say, hey, I'm just going to go straight into it because I know what I'm looking at, and also my RPE today is going to be fairly moderate, then you've got some evidence that you'd like to use. However, if you're doing anything that's considered like a heavy, low rep, like technical movement, especially like a back squat, deadlift, and especially with Olympic lifts, or if you are coming in cold or stiff, coming off of an injury, you are probably going to need more build-up sets. So do keep that in mind. So this is where I'll insert my opinion here. So my opinion, my perspective, and this will come probably as any sort of a shock or surprise to anyone who I've programmed for, or anybody who's seen some of the full programs that I put out. I'm not talking about just like the Instagram reels, or if you happen to get my weekly email that has some free workouts in there every single week. Sometimes I'll include a free primer and sometimes I won't. But as far as like the build-up sets, like the specific warm-up sets for the movement, I always will encourage those. And two reasons why. One reason is because the overwhelming majority of the people that I work with and the population that I program for, whether it's a template that's going to go out to a mass group of people, or whether it's an individual program that I'm building for you one-on-one, because that's what I do also, they are folks, or you are folks who likely are moving from one activity to the next activity. So if you have worked that morning and then you're going to lift in the afternoon, because as I think about it, I've got folks who, some of them work out at 5 a.m. or 4 a.m. I've got some folks who work out on their lunch break, and then some that work out right after work. They are in varying states of readiness, first mentally, for that training. So with going from one thing to the other, whether we're talking about like you woke up and you literally just like rolled down your stairs into the basement, or like shuffled your way out to your garage to get your lift in, I am a proponent of making sure that, one, there's a general warm-up. So a general warm-up I will put together will be typically about 4 to maybe 6 minutes, maybe on the high side, just to get somebody like in the mindset to actually be training and move in general movement patterns that would relate to the workout. I feel like I'm going a little off track here and confusing things. So one, I will typically program a general primer, is what I'll call it, just to get you primed like mentally and physically, whether you're working morning, afternoon, or evening, because rarely am I, and hardly at all, am I working with somebody who their whole like life and their whole job and their whole personality is like that workout. So we likely need some sort of a pause and or some sort of an intro into, now it's time to get into the training. And it legit could be like you just finished like a tough work meeting, or you just finished wrapping up like a interaction with, your kid's school, or you're taking a break in between like different tasks that you need to do for a myriad of different reasons, or you just like packed up stuff from the grocery store and just unloaded that, and now you're going to get your workout in, or maybe you're doing laundry right after you work out, and that's on your mind because you're like, I got to fold that and then I got to go pick the kids up. There's a lot of different things going on. So I utilize not only the general warm-up, but also specific warm-up. So I call them build-up sets or feeler sets to help folks like really get into the motion that they're going to get into. So one, it's from a neurological standpoint, like get your mind right. Number two, with specific warm-up sets. So I call them build-up sets. So specific warm-up sets or build-up sets, more often than not, when I'm first starting to work with people. And when I say first, this could be for the first 3+ months, because typically if I'm working with somebody one-on-one, I don't offer anything shorter than 3 months to begin with. That's something that I used to offer shorter than that and let folks go month to month just to start off. And I no longer do that anymore because it takes a while just to get through that initial assessment phase of really understanding what someone's pattern is. So what I would find is that until we really got into a groove, a common scenario is that folks would think, okay, well, let's use like a dumbbell row, for example. I've always used anywhere from 15 to 20 pounds on the dumbbell row. And so what I will see on their training log is they did 3 sets of 10 reps of the 20-pound dumbbell. So when I'll do a follow-up and just say, hey, noticing over the last 3 weeks, barring any sort of injury that's going on, I've noticed that we've had that lift at the same exact number for the past 3 weeks. And with the way that the program is built over the week progressions, we are ideally increasing the weight, again, barring injury or something along those lines, like some sort of like event that's going on that's really just zapping the energy. And it's really more about, let's make sure we just get the movements in themselves just to maintain. And typically I will program something like do 3 sets of 10 to 12 reps. So the idea that somebody is sticking at the 20 pounds for all 10 reps over a 3-week time frame, I start to get a little bit curious. And what I will typically find is that somebody is used to, well, that's just what I've always done. Then when we start talking about build-up sets, I'm like, well, notice that you've got a couple of build-up sets before you go into your working sets. So what I want you to do is, since you already know that you can go to 20 pounds, let's say like 15 to 20 pounds in your build-up set. And then when you get to your first working set, go ahead and hit that 20 pounds, but let's see if you can get it for 12 reps. They'll hit it and it's like, okay, well, then that means the next set, let's go to the 25-pound dumbbell and let's see if we can get that within that 10 to 12 rep range. And then lo and behold, they get that 25-pound dumbbell for 10 reps and they're like, whoa, I've never really messed around with that. I just assumed I was always going to be right around the 20 pounds. And that's where the effectiveness from my point of view of doing those specific warm-up sets, or again, what I call those build-up sets. You'll also hear them called like ramp-up sets or feeler sets. I keep saying feel up. Those feeler sets can really be effective because they help you understand where is your available energy for that particular day. So that's something that has been really eye-opening for a handful of my clients too, is just this understanding. And I may do an episode on this at some point in the future of auto-regulation, just really getting an understanding of, okay, where is my available energy for today and what have I previously done on this lift before? And when you take those 2 pieces of information, where's my available energy today? What have I done on these lifts before? It helps you get an understanding of where to start with those build-up sets, and then you load from there, understanding where's the appropriate range of intensity, the RPE, or how many reps in the tank am I trying to leave, the RIR, for this particular lift, and then you are off and running. So it's what we call a double progression model. It's a constant like, okay, I'm looking at increasing the reps, but as I increase the reps, I'm also looking to increase the weight. Well, as I increase the weight, I may not be able to do as many reps. So I'm going to increase the weight, and then I'll just keep working at that until I get the reps up, and then, okay, now it's time to go to the next weight. So all right, I'm getting off topic and kind of nerding out on lifting. So let me get back to it. So again, those are just some anecdotes for you to go along with that particular study on where I think this potentially does apply and where it may not necessarily apply. So let's give you some practical takeaways here. First, when it comes to an overall general warm-up, I would say that I strongly recommend, again, for the population that I work with and most likely the population that's listening to this podcast, doing some sort of mobility, just bringing your body temperature up. Unless you already have been spending a decent amount of your day moving and grooving and shaking and baking the entire time. If you have spent most of your morning seated in a desk or in a chair, not seated in a desk, but seated at a desk in a chair like I am now while recording this podcast, and then you just go straight into doing some deadlifts, I don't know that that's necessarily going to work out real well for you. So I do always strongly recommend that you spend, again, anywhere from like 4 to 6 minutes just generally getting into not only the physical, but also the mental space to get into your workout time. If that's something that you'd be interested in, by the way, if that's something that could add some value where you would be interested in a document where I put together, let's say like 4 full body warm-ups that take under 10 minutes to do, then reach out to me. And if I get enough interest in that, and for me, enough interest is like 5 people. I don't really ask for a lot. So if 5 people reach out, whether you email me or you send me a DM on Instagram, or if you have some other way to get a hold of me, if you contact me and once I get 5 people that say yes, I would definitely be interested in just a PDF that would have YouTube links of, hey, here's some quick warm-ups that you can do, have YouTube links to the movements, then I will put that together. But I got to have 5 people. So tell a friend to tell a friend. All right. So I do recommend doing just a general warm-up. Then also if you were looking to get a takeaway of building your own warm-up strategy, I would say for a specific warm-up or ramp-up or feeler sets, I would say that you do generally about 2 of those particular movements. And I do think that if you're looking at like the how intense to go, I would do 1 set that's going to be fairly light but higher number of reps, then do another set that's going to be moderately loaded but a lower number of reps, and then if you can squeeze in a third one, especially for your first main movement, and ideally your second movement. I'm not saying you need to go through this for every single one, because even I don't program necessarily that way, but for your main lift of the day or your first 2 big lifts of the day, I would say doing 2 to 3 build-up sets before you get into your working sets, which are likely going to be anywhere from 1 to 3 reps away from failure. I would recommend start lighter with higher reps, then your second set, bring that rep scheme down, but load it a bit more moderate. And then by the 3rd build-up set, you should pretty much be like just maybe a few pounds off of where you plan to do that first working set, if not right at your working set weight, but you're doing, let's say, 3 to 4 reps when you plan to do your first working set at, let's say, like 10 reps. So you're basically already used to having that much weight on the bar, that much weight on the machine, but you're just doing like 50% of the rep range that you're going to do for your first working set. Hopefully that made sense. Some things you want to watch for: if you've got really poor form, if you are already exhausted after your very first working set and you haven't like actually warmed up, then that's your sign like, okay, I should probably have done some warm-up sets. So pause and take some weight off and bring that back down. So if you do notice that that without doing any warm up, your first working set like totally gasses you, then that potentially is a sign that a specific warm up set or some specific warm up sets would be helpful for you. And just understand again here that efficiency is really about finding like what we call the minimum effective dose of a warm-up that isn't going to sacrifice your performance or your safety. So this is not about like winning the warm-up at all. It is about just general preparedness and being ready to rock for your working sets. So in wrapping things up here, something that I do want to share that I kind of referenced at the beginning is how I have this under my imaginary list of things that are controversial that really shouldn't be. And from my point of view, when the majority of the content that I've seen that seems to almost demonize warm-ups, where people will say, doing like these long warm-ups, it's just not necessary. If it takes you, 20 minutes to warm up for your lift, then you're doing something wrong and all this other stuff. And on the surface, I would agree. Like if you need to warm up for 20 minutes in order to get in a 30-minute lift, like something is up. And I'm not going to necessarily say that you're wrong, because there should always be like a why behind things, because I don't know your full context. I just, as your coach, if you were starting off with me and you mentioned that it takes you 20 minutes to get warmed up and then you have 30 minutes left to lift, and we're not specifically talking about you're specifically getting ready for like a weightlifting competition and there's just one movement that you're really focused on for your actual workout, I would have some questions about how did you design that particular program? So where I think a lot of this controversy comes from is you have folks who are primarily in the hypertrophy space, which is the, let's call it like the bodybuilding and muscle building focused space, who are basically like pooping on warm-up strategies, but the warm-up strategies that they're talking about are in primarily the CrossFit space. And that is not anywhere near a fair comparison. So for a frame of reference, I am someone who for a number of years, CrossFit was probably at its peak, it was probably about 70% of the training that I did in any given weeks. It was 70% CrossFit and about 30% bodybuilding, probably at my peak. And that was for a number of years. I'd say probably like 5 years or so. And I've always done some sort of mix of bodybuilding and then we'll call it CrossFit, but just generally like functional focused movement, GPP type stuff, working in Metcons and different things like that. But the classic like CrossFit layout for a full class where you start off with mobility work and a GPP type of warm up, and then you get into your strength, and then you do some sort of a Metcon and then a cool down. Like that's pretty much how I trained for a number of years for the primary amount of time that I was training. And then I would still here and there mix in some accessory stuff. So I do, like chest work, I do bis and tris, like all that stuff. So I say that just to say that I'm not coming to this conversation or this argument with like, oh, I watched a few videos of the CrossFit Games back in the day, so I think I kind of have an understanding of what it looks like. Like I have a pretty good understanding of what we're looking at here. So when you have folks that are in the hypertrophy space who are saying like, it doesn't make sense for you to do all these complicated warm-ups and all this crazy mobility work and all that stuff, they're talking about they're basically taking a dump on the warm-ups that are done before CrossFit classes or a traditional like strength and Metcon focused class. And I would agree with them, but that also it's kind of like, I don't know, baseball players making fun of the warm-ups that football players do. You guys are getting ready for two completely different things. Football players are getting ready to like try to kill each other. Like literally, that is what they are getting ready to do. Baseball players are getting ready to try to massacre a ball. Like they're two very different things. While both athletic sports, they still, in performance-focused sports, they are two very different types of physical demands. And before somebody is like, are you comparing bodybuilding to baseball, and say it's not that strict? No, that is not what I'm saying at all. It's just the first thing that popped into my head of like how different the points of view can be. So when someone is doing a lengthier mobility piece for a CrossFit style workout, that is, in my opinion, very necessary because they are getting ready to do likely a very heavy lift. And then after that, they are getting ready to very likely do something at a super fast speed, high amount of intensity, and maybe doing it under a heavy load also. So that's that type of mobility and warm up that may take 10, 12, maybe 15 minutes to do. That may be actually a very smart move there. But if you are somebody whose main workout looks something like, okay, I'm going to do leg press, then I'm going to do split squats and some leg curls, and then I'm going to finish off with some bicep curls and some triceps, then no, I don't think it makes a whole lot of sense for you to have a 15 to 20 minute workout or 15 to 20 minute warm up of a whole bunch of mobility work for that. I would say, again, as I described earlier, what I program for my clients, 4 to 6 minutes of moving your body in the general movement patterns, working on some mobility stuff, especially again, because you're an everyday general population type person. You probably are in a seated or shoulders hunched forward position, either on your phone or holding a steering wheel or something along those lines the majority of the day. So being able to mobilize some areas that usually don't get mobilized unless there is a specific primer for you, can be very helpful. So that's just my take, and maybe hopefully a different perspective for you to take the next time that you see somebody saying like these long warm-ups aren't necessary. Get an understanding of when you say long warm-up, can you help me understand, like show me what you mean when you say long warm-up? And if they pull up like Wodify or something from a CrossFit class, again, you're a baseball player criticizing the warm-ups that football players do. It's not exactly the same thing. All right. So let's go ahead and bring this episode to a close. If you've stuck around this long, I sincerely appreciate it. If you have a particular fitness and or nutrition related topic that you would be interested in hearing about, feel free to reach out to me. You can either reach me via email, jk@jkmcleod.com. You can DM me on Instagram. Coach JK McLeod, that's MCLEOD on Instagram is my handle. And with that, thank you so much for listening to another episode of the Help Me Understand podcast. I truly appreciate it. Take care, and I'll talk to you next time.